Hello, educators. My name is Carrie Cole with Side by Side Educational Consulting. Thanks so much for joining me for today's Quick Tip Tuesday as we continue exploring strategies that help learning stick. So last week we talked about mass practice, that type of practice that's concentrated and high intensity repetition, usually provided in one or two lessons. Today we're moving on to space practice. And teachers, this is where the real magic for long-term retention happens. Have you ever noticed that when you come back to a concept a few days later, your students might not remember it as well as they did during the lesson or right after the lesson? That's exactly why massed practice alone isn't enough. It really needs to be layered with spaced practice. Spaced practice means revisiting the same skill or concept multiple times, spread out across days, weeks, or even months. And instead of cramming all of the practice into a few sessions, you revisit it in short bursts over time. Think of it as a little today, a little tomorrow, big impact later. That little bit of time in between gives students' brains a chance to forget a little and then remember again, which actually strengthens memory and understanding. You want to bring back that remembering after a period of forgetting. Research shows that it doesn't just reinforce memory, it also deepens understanding and helps students transfer learning to new situations. The best part? It doesn't have to be time consuming. You can build space practice into warm-ups, exit tickets, quick checks, or short review activities. A simple rhythm might be revisiting the concept 1 day later, then 3 days later, a week later, and then even a month later to keep things fresh. Again, retrieving that information from long-term memory to combat that forgetting cycle. So for example, after teaching the long A sound in one lesson, maybe with mass practice, you might bring it back the next day for a quick review by having students brainstorm a list of the long A spellings from memory that were taught the day previous. Then revisit it over several days by having students read a decodable text with those long A spellings. And then reinforce it once again with a spelling game later that week. Again, spaced practice over time, short bursts over time. Another example might be in high school history. After introducing the causes of World War I, you might revisit them the next day by having students complete a bell ringer, by brainstorming a list of causes from memory from the day previous. Later in the lesson, then they can then incorporate those causes into a short timeline activity. 3 days later, perhaps they then use those causes to identify them further with a primary source analysis. A week later, they expand on those causes through a class discussion on alliances and so on. Remember, every revisit strengthens memory and helps build deeper connections. The result? Students build stronger, longer lasting connections to the material. They're moving that to long-term memory forever. Space practice isn't just review, it's review that sticks. It's intentional about when it's placed. So here's today's challenge. Look at your lesson plans. Where can you revisit skills or concepts at strategic intervals instead of just a few times? Remember, small bursts of practice will help your students hold on to their learning for the long haul. Thanks for joining me for today's Quick Tip Tuesday. Next week, we'll wrap up this series with interleaved practice and look at how mixing things up can take learning even further. See you then, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.